going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the fantasy headliners, and we're going to jump into all of the matchups here shortly for our week 2 wide receiver start and sit video. But if you have been with the fantasy headliners since last season, you know how we do it on these shows. We hold ourselves accountable, so we always talk about our hit and misses and our percentages from last week. So let's throw it up on the screen and take a look at what I got right and what I got wrong in the first week of the season. And for wide receivers, a 66% hit rate last week, I'll take it. I will take it for week 1 of the NFL season. My goal every week is to be over 70%. I was really close there. 64 out of 97, made 64 out of 97 calls correct. Now, we all know the big miss last week, right? Trying to sit Adam Thielen. I talked to Adam about it. We're good now. Okay, he's not upset with me, so none of you should be either. And we won't be sitting him moving forward. Not right now anyway. So the one thing about that call was that I was not expecting Green Bay to pour all over Minnesota. The game been a lot closer. It may have been a little bit different, but whatever. I got it wrong. That happens. Of course, Sammy Watkins, week 1, he goes off. Robbie Anderson and MVS had good games, but some hits I had last week. You know, Jamison Crowder, a guy I talked about a lot this offseason. Told you to get him in your lineups last week. Calvin Ridley was a hit. Anthony Miller was a hit. John Brown was a hit. Don't forget, Marquise Brown was another guy too last week that I was all over. I said, hey, we got to get him in our lineup. So, yep, had the big miss with Thielen, but had a lot of correct calls last week, and I'm feeling good about it. So we need to jump into the matchups, and we're getting a lot of questions right now about trades and things like that. So just to remind everybody, you can head down to the link below for Patreon, and for $10 a month, you get access to Jake and I with all the questions that you have, guaranteed responses. So just keep that in mind if you're trying to get in touch with us. Really busy right now, but if you go that route, we'll get you taken care of as quickly as possible. So first game up of the week, let's jump into it and talk about Thursday night football. First matchup of the week, the Bengals are headed to Cleveland for Cleveland's home opener. Last week, the Browns allowed 40 points to wide receivers in the opening week's matchup. So this week, I'm going to roll with AJ Green and Tyler Boyd. AJ Green looking good last week, looking like he's finally healthy, ready to roll. We're going to toss him out there. Now, John Ross ended up tying Boyd with 5 targets last week. So it was a little bit odd to see that in terms of targets. But Joe Burrow, just getting started, looked good last week. Like the poise in the pocket, like the way he looks. He's just going to get better. The better he gets, the more production we see from wide receivers. So I'm going to go with AJ Green and Tyler Boyd, both as a start this week. John Ross is going to be a sit for me. Now, Ross only really needs one big play to be a start, but as of right now, I don't know if they're going to push the ball down the field too much. And against the Cleveland Browns, I really don't know if you need to. Is their secondary going to be healthy? We'll keep an eye on that. But AJ Green and Tyler Boyd, both guys I'm going to roll with. On the other side of the ball, though, for the Cleveland Browns, I'm going to put OBJ as a sit this week. I got to see more out of him. I have got to see this guy playing better. I've got to see Baker Mayfield playing better. There seems to be some tension right now. Can he get going? Unless I see that, I'm going to go ahead and sit him this week on a short week against Cincinnati. The Bengals defense last week wasn't too bad. They held the Chargers wide receivers to only 21.2 fantasy points. It was actually the 6th lowest in the NFL. Now, part of that might have been Tyrod Taylor, but with the way Baker Mayfield has performed, do we really trust him that much more? I will go with Jarvis Landry, though. I'm going to go ahead and start Jarvis Landry because that connection seems to be fine no matter what. And then for Rashad Higgins, we're going to also list him as a sit as well. The Jaguars are going to head to Tennessee for a matchup that always brings a couple of surprises, right? We've seen this in the past when these two teams get together. Derrick Henry, he had that big 99-yard run against them, but there always seems to be something odd with this matchup, and that could end up taking place again this Sunday. Jacksonville playing a lot better than people expected this past weekend, but I don't know if they're going to be able to keep that going heading into Tennessee. Tennessee looking good. They're going to be ready to roll. For the Jaguars, I'm going to go ahead and start DJ Chark this week. He only had 3 targets last week, wasn't really the main guy. Keelan Cole was, but that's all right. I'm going to go ahead and roll Chark out again this week against the Titans because he's got, again, that big play upside, and no more Leonard Fournette means no more targets for him. So those targets are going to end up getting to Chark a little bit more and a little bit more. For Keelan Cole, I am going to go ahead and list him as a sit, even though he led the team in targets last week. And Laviska Shenault, I mean, I've got nothing against this guy. I like him, but let me see something with him. What is that role going to be? Are they going to play him at wide receiver a little bit more? He was at Wildcat a little bit. He did play in the backfield. I just want to see this role develop. That's why I'm kind of sitting back and waiting. He's a sit for me, but he's a guy that could potentially end up becoming like an every week type starter for me as well, because they are using him all over the field. But this Tennessee defense is no joke. Up front is no joke. Are they going to be able to disrupt that a little bit? I don't think any of these type of gimmick plays that they might have with him in the backfield are going to work against a defense like that. And that's why he's going to be a sit for me this week. Now looking over at the Titans, who would have thought that I would have had Corey Davis at any point in time listed as a start? But after that week 1 performance, I'm buying into him being a guy that finally breaks out this year. It took adding A.J. Brown, a true wide receiver 1 type player, to make it happen. But regardless, it could potentially be happening. I'm going to go ahead and roll with Corey Davis and A.J. Brown both this week. Adam Humphries, though, I'm going to list him as a start. What I could end up seeing happen is the Titans really trying to put it on the Jaguars to start because, again, Jacksonville played pretty good against Indianapolis this past week. Tennessee doesn't want to find themselves in the same predicament where maybe they're kind of playing down to the Jaguars level. So what do? They go out, they really try to hammer the ball home. A lot of passing attempts in the first half. And then, of course, Derrick Henry takes over in the second half, and they end up flying to a victory against Jacksonville at home. Carolina is going to head to Tampa Bay this week to face the Buccaneers, coming off a frustrating loss on the road against New Orleans. That offense wasn't really rolling the way we would have liked to have seen, but that's okay. They're going to get on the same page shortly. But you know what really surprised me about that game was the Tampa Bay defense. This week for the Panthers, I've got DJ Moore as a start, Anderson as a sit, and Samuel as a sit. Now, Samuel did see 8 targets last week and caught 5 of those, but the Tampa Bay defense held New Orleans wide receivers to 20.2 fantasy points last week, the 3rd lowest of any team last week. That defense is looking pretty good. A defense that wasn't that great last year, looking possibly to take a little bit of a step forward this year. They could potentially shut down that big play from Anderson. Michael Thomas, yes, the injury had something to do with it, but they kept him in check as well. DJ Moore, though, he's the type of guy that if you own him, you're probably not sitting him anytime soon. So we'll go ahead and roll with him, even though that ceiling could be a little bit limited this week. Mike Evans for Tampa Bay, he's going to be a sit for me right now. Now, when you see my rankings, you might take a look at my rankings a little bit later in the week and be like, well, what are you talking about, Kyle? You have him as a sit, but you have some other guys behind him that are a start. Well, when I do my rankings, I kind of look at upside in season. What's the upside for these players? And the upside for Mike Evans is always good. It's always there, right? But me as a fantasy owner, Tom Brady and Evans were the two that didn't really look to be on the same page last week. And there was some plays where it just didn't seem to be clicking between those two. And again, are we going to see Tom Brady continue to develop with this offense so the ball goes down the field a little bit more often? We'd like to see him push the ball down the field. I think it's going to happen, but that might be kind of the last step in this offense really taking form. And if that's the case, Mike Evans is going to be a little bit boom or bust. So this week against the Panthers, I'm going to go ahead and sit Mike Evans and maybe look for a player that might be a little bit safer. Now, if you're somebody out there that lost your week 1 matchup, we got to get you a dub this week, and relying on Mike Evans might not be the safest way to go. So I'm going to go ahead and leave him on my bench. I will roll with Chris Godwin, though, and Scotty Miller. I'm going to go ahead and roll with him as a start this week as well. Now, I don't think his ceiling is going to be that high, but in PPR formats, even half PPR formats, again, this team's trying to get rolling, get on the same page, and the way that you kind of do that in these games is you work your way up to those bigger plays, right? We see it a lot with like younger quarterbacks. They start the plays out with high percentage passes. Well, that's kind of what happened last week with Scotty Miller. Some of those high percentage plays underneath, Chris Godwin as well in those intermediate routes. It was the Mike Evans down the field, those big plays that just didn't progress the way we'd like. So for Scotty Miller, even though I don't think he has that high of a ceiling this week, he could have a low or a high enough floor that in like a PPR or half PPR league, if you're really dealing for a flex or a wide receiver 3, he may not be the worst choice out there. Even though the Broncos are missing Von Miller, they performed a lot better than I think a lot of people expected them to this past Monday. They're going to head to Pittsburgh this week, though, and that's going to be a matchup that might bring a little bit more difficulty. So we'll see how that plays out. In terms of wide receivers, though, for the Broncos, if Sutton is ready to go, I will roll with Cortland Sutton this week. With Jerry Jeudy, though, I'm going to go ahead and sit him. Now, the one thing that I'm kind of keeping an eye on is what happened with Pittsburgh last week against the Giants. Well, they gave up some big plays to Slayton. They gave up 6 receptions for 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. So who's going to end up being that big play guy down the field? Is it going to be Jeudy? Is Sutton going to be the guy? That's kind of why I'm going back and forth on this. Now, if Sutton ends up being out, I don't think it helps Jeudy that much anyway. I think one of the good things about Darius Slayton kind of breaking out last week is, again, you have other guys there keeping it that you have to keep an eye on with New York. You had Sterling Shepard that you had to keep an eye on. You also had, of course, Saquon Barkley coming out of the backfield and Evan Ingram. For the Broncos, you do have Noah Fant. You do have Phillip Lindsay, but is Phillip Lindsay going to be healthy enough? Is Melvin Gordon going to really step up and be the guy that takes that many plays if Phillip Lindsay is out? So this offense right now with the Phillip Lindsay injury, with Sutton maybe not being 100%, kind of going back and forth on what we're going to see. And they have to go to Pittsburgh and play a really tough defense. So we will keep an eye out on that and see what happens throughout the week. Right now, Sutton is a start for me. If he doesn't end up playing, though, I don't know if I really roll with anybody else, maybe outside of Noah Fant this week. Flip it over, though. Go with the Steelers now. Juju Smith-Schuster, JJSS, looking like the guy of old with Big Ben back under center. Scored a couple of touchdowns. Deontay Johnson led the team in targets, though. So developing is kind of that wide receiver, too. And that's what we kind of said this offseason, that, yes, you were getting Ben Roethlisberger back, but another step forward for Juju was the fact that these wide receivers had developed around him. And James Washington also had a touchdown as well. Now, I am going to stay away from Washington and Claypool this week. Claypool had a really nice catch down the sideline, and Washington had that touchdown. But Washington, to me, feels a little too TD dependent. He's a guy maybe like in a standard league you would play, like in the flex, if you would absolutely need him to. But it looks like the main targets in this offense are going to be Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster. That's why I'm going to roll with them as my 2 starts for the Steelers this week. The Rams are heading to Philadelphia, a team that just continues to get knocked around with injuries. They may have started to take a little bit of a step forward. We'll see if Miles Sanders can get on the field. Is Jalen Reagor 100% healthy? Can they get the offensive line healthy? There's a lot of question marks there right now with Philadelphia. Bobby Trees, though. Bobby Trees is going to be a start for the Rams. Cooper Kupp is going to be a start for the Rams as well. I'm getting a little bit nervous about Cooper Kupp, okay? I didn't really have him that high this offseason. I was worried about it. Heck, Chris Kennedy and I, like at the very beginning of the offseason, had a little bit of back and forth. We were thinking about making a bet between Woods and Kupp because I had Woods, and slowly but surely, I kind of brought Chris over to the dark side, and I said, hey, Robert Woods is going to have it this year. Since the move to 12 personnel, Kupp just hasn't been the same on the outside. So we'll see if he can get back to being himself. If they try to get creative to get him open, I'm going to still list him as a star right now. You've probably paid a decently hefty price on him. And if he gets going, he gets going. We've seen what Cooper Kupp can do in the red zone. So I'll continue to roll with him for right now. For Jefferson, Van Jefferson, really locked in as the wide receiver, even over Josh Reynolds right now. I haven't even included Josh Reynolds in this video, but Van Jefferson for me is still going to continue to be a sit. Really, the only way that he probably props into a start for me is if Kupp or Woods, knock on wood, I'm going to find it there, knock on wood, were to get injured or anything. But for me, I mean, I like him. I like what I see there with Van Jefferson, but the volume probably won't be able to be there, especially with also Tyler Higbee being around. And then for the Eagles, I'm just listing everyone as a sit this week. Why? Well, number one, no Miles Sanders. Is Miles Sanders going to be out there? We don't know yet. Last week, we kind of saw it without that guy in the backfield that truly generates that concern from the defense. It was difficult to find guys open down the field. Is Miles Sanders going to be on the field? We don't know yet. Jalen Ramsey, who's he going to be on? Is he going to cover Reagor? Is he going to cover Djax? Is the offensive line going to be healthy? Is Wentz going to have enough time to throw? Personally, even though I love Jalen Reagor, and I was all over Djax last week until Sunday when we found out they were going to be missing an offensive lineman as well, and we found out Miles Sanders was going to be out. And then at that point, I backed off and I said, we're not starting Djax anymore. Well, kind of the same thing at this point. Would be excited for him. However, I'm not trusting anyone from Philadelphia until this team can start to get healthy. Speaking of teams decimated by injuries, man, San Francisco can just not catch a break. And they're going to head into New York this week, and it's probably a good time to run into the New York Jets, right? But let's talk about San Francisco first. They just signed Mohamed Sanu. I just added him to the depth chart for them. And honestly, I'm going to list him as a sit right now. I don't want, even if he gets out there on Sunday, I would assume they'll probably put him out there. I mean, he used to run in a Kyle Shanahan offense, so he probably doesn't need a whole lot of time getting up to par with the playbook. He's the guy I'll maybe take a look at in a couple of weeks or something like that. But, signing on basically Tuesday night and then trying to get on the field on Sunday, not really taking that risk in week one. I'm not starting anybody though. Okay. I can't trust anyone on this team at the wide receiver position. It's going to be to the tight ends. If Kittle's healthy, it's going to be to him. I'm thinking they're going to get Jordan Reed a little bit more involved this week. It's going to continue to be the running backs, whether it be Mostert or McKinnon, Tevin Coleman. Maybe he gets a little bit more work this week. We'll keep an eye on that, but I'm not willing to risk my second week and a potential win on the 49ers wide receiver. So we're just going to stay away from everyone in San Francisco this week. On the flip side, though, talking about the Jets, Crowder is going to be a start for me, okay? Big week last week. Is going to continue to be a target hog. 13 targets. And that's why I talked about this offseason with Crowder. He's going to get those targets over and over and over and over. He turned them into a good week last week. Could do it again this week. Now, Rashad Perryman is a sit for me. He was one of only like 5 players last week to run a route on 100% of the plays for his team. So he was out there every single play, and he ran a route on every single play. However, only 4 targets. Why was that? Okay, and you lost Le'Veon Bell. They signed Kalen Ballage. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that's going to do. They've got Frank Gore. Are those things going to, take anything? The thing is you've got to have something with a run game to be able to open up those plays down the field. I don't know if Sam Darnold's going to get enough time. I don't think they're going to have any type of a run game really. So for me, I'm just going to stay away from Perryman, even though he's definitely a guy who could start seeing volume. I'm worried that he's not going to have enough time to get open. And of course, Chris Hogan is also going to be a sit for me this week. Buffalo at Miami, and boy, did I love seeing the way John Brown and Stephon Diggs were on the field together with Josh Allen. This looks like an offense that could really take a huge step forward, and Brown and Diggs both look like guys that can produce every single week. I've got them both listed as starts, just like I did last week. The Beazles is going to be a sit for me, though. And the reason the Beazles is going to be a sit, but the Brown and the Diggs, is that his new nickname? The Diggs? Brown and the Diggs. That's what we're going to call him. It sounds like a band, like a jazz band. Brown and the Diggs. That's what we're going to call him from now on. Miami only allowed 19 points to New England wide receivers last week. However, let's toss that out the door, okay? Because New England only threw the ball 19 times last week. And they don't have developed wide receivers outside of Julian Edelman like Brown and Diggs and then Beasley in the slot. So part of me, the reason I'm sitting Beasley is because I don't think he's really going to command a lot of those targets over Brown or Diggs. And this isn't going to be a game where Josh Allen's going to be throwing it the entire game. We're going to see a lot of Devin Singletary. We're going to see a lot of Zach Moss this week. Miami could get behind big in the first half, and then Buffalo might just run the ball the rest of the time. Even with that being said, it's one of those things where typically I'm like, okay, this is a game that could get out of control quick. We're going to want a wide receiver on the other side of the field, right? Because they're going to be throwing it. No. Not in this game, we're not. Because Parker, Williams, and Grant are all going to be sits for me. I had Parker listed as a sit last week. He was looking as a sit even before his injury. That hamstring flared up on him. I am not feeling it. Okay. Williams. Yeah, they can get him in and out of the slot, but Buffalo is a pretty stingy defense. And last week, this Miami offense couldn't even do anything against New England. So how are they going to do anything against Buffalo? I'm going to stay away from the wide receivers right now, especially if Parker's dealing with an injury. I'm definitely staying away from him because there's really no upside for me in this matchup this week. Minnesota and Indianapolis, probably two of the biggest underperformers from last week. Now, yep, I messed it up last week. I had Adam Thielen as a sit, didn't work out that way, and I owned it. It happens, okay? I'm not going to make every single call right. I'm not going to get every single call wrong, though. And as you saw, I got 66% of the calls right last week. So we're looking to take a step forward this week, and Adam Thielen is going to be a part of that. So we're going to list him as a start this week. For Johnson and Jefferson, though, I'm going to list him as sits. Is this offense going to look better? It did not look very good last week. I mean, even with Thielen, for some of you that were giving me a rough time about him, you had to wait till the fourth quarter to give me a rough time about him, because leading into that fourth quarter, he was like 3 for 42 or something like that. The offense was not looking very good. Indianapolis did allow 44.9 fantasy points to Jacksonville wide receivers in week 1, though. That was the second most in the NFL. So you would have to assume that Adam Thielen's probably going to get himself a nice amount of targets, turn them into a decent fantasy week. And then Johnson and Jefferson, somebody may end up hitting. But for right now, I really don't want to try and guess who that is. You probably got plenty of depth that you don't have to rely on it either. So we're just going to play it safe and list them as sits. However, on the flip side, we've got T.Y. Hilton as a start, and my Manscaped must start of the week. Don't forget, we're sponsored by Manscaped. Right? Manscaped.com. Head on over there, use promo code Headliners, all capital letters, and you get 20% off any of their great products over there. My Manscaped must start of the week, Paris Campbell from the Indianapolis Colts. He ran 61 of 78 snaps last week, and he ran 58 of those out of the slot. Kind of what we were thinking about this offseason, and I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't include Paris Campbell in my waiver wire video. When I'm going through and I'm looking at some of these names, it's like, this guy's over 50% owned, right? I don't need to include him. Paris Campbell wasn't. After I started seeing a lot of questions about it, I was like, Paris Campbell's over 50% owned. I can't include him in this video. He wasn't. I was shocked, because we talked about Paris Campbell a lot this offseason, and I felt like we really weren't the only ones that thought this is a guy that could take another step forward. So to see that he was under 50% owned caught me off guard. So that's my bad, Headliner Nation. I did not include him in the waiver wire video. I thought he was over 50% owned. He's not. But if you own him, we're putting him in our lineup this week, because he could absolutely blow up against Minnesota, who gave up 79.4 fantasy points to Green Bay wide receivers last week. We are looking at a big week incoming from Indianapolis potentially. So Hilton's going to be a start, Campbell's going to be a start, but Pittman and Pascal will end up being sits for me. Detroit's going to head up to Green Bay, and honestly, they should be heading into this game 1-0. Not only did they blow a huge lead against Chicago, but DeAndre Swift dropped one of the easiest touchdowns that you'll ever see in the end zone, leading to a Bears win. Are they going to be able to turn it around in Green Bay? I highly doubt it. Green Bay allowed 44.20 fantasy points last week to opposing wide receivers. Expect a shootout. Okay, expect this game to be back and forth, with Green Bay probably winning in the end. Now, if Kenny Golladay is healthy, he's going to be a start for me. But if he's healthy, Marvin Jones is going to be a sit for me. If we have to reverse it and we have to go the other direction, okay, and we'll keep an eye on that as the week goes, then I might pivot and put Jones as a start if Golladay ends up being out. Now, the reason I'm going to list Jones as a sit if Golladay is in, because Danny Amendola is a guy that had 7 targets, caught 5 of them for 81 yards last week. And he was a guy that also was like Matthew Stafford's go-to target. That's right. In some third down situations late in the game, he was going towards Amendola. There was a pick too where he kind of forced the ball to Amendola. He was really looking his way quite often. So working out of the slot, definitely a guy that I could see getting quite a bit of target. So in half PPR and PPR leagues, he's going to be a start for me this week. Even though his ceiling isn't that high, I think his floor is low enough to warrant a start for me. On the flip side, I'm starting everybody from Green Bay. MVS, Lazard, Adams, 100%. We're going to be starting him because Detroit could be missing all 3 of their cornerbacks this week. And if that happens, just expect Aaron Rodgers to have a whole lot of fun. The guy could throw like 6 touchdowns against Detroit this week, probably. So I expect all these guys to produce in some way, shape, or form. All of them have really good floors. All of them have excellent ceilings. Lazard and MVS will kind of battle back and forth for that wide receiver too. MVS has got that big play upside. And then, of course, Lazard could be a little bit safer in terms of the volume that he will see. But we're going to get all of them into our lineup. Adams is a wide receiver 1. The other 2 guys is flex or wide receiver 3 options. Atlanta and Dallas could be a fun shootout to watch on Sunday, and one I'll be paying very close attention to. Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, they're both going to be starts for me this week. And even though Russell Gage is a sit for me, this dude had 12 targets last week, the same as Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. Now, will it be that big of a shootout that he could see that again? I don't know about that. He had a big week one, but quite honestly, if you're relying on Russell Gage right now, you probably have got bigger concerns than trying to play him. I'm not going to get too fancy this week and try to fit him into a slot or anything like that. If you're playing like a GPP or something like that and you want to put him in your DFS lineup, that might not be too bad. But in terms of season-long fantasy, we're going to stick with Jones and Ridley. Now, on the flip side, for Dallas, we're going to be starting Gallup and we're going to be starting Cooper, but sitting Lamb. All three of these guys are going to produce. Okay, all three of them are going to produce. It's going to, to me, go back and forth between Lamb and Gallup. Who has the better options that week? Who has the better matchup that week? We saw Amari Cooper get 14 targets last week, which led the team. And this was a guy that I was very high on. To see that out of him in week one, very encouraging. And honestly, I don't think very many people are even talking about it. A lot of people were down on Cooper because of Gallup and Lamb. Now we'll see. Can Cooper maintain that steadiness, or is he going to go back to the Cooper of old where, yeah, he had a good game last week, but this week he has maybe 6 targets, catches one of them, and has 10 yards? We'll see what happens. Gallup, to me, is a big play upside guy, okay? I like that about him, and that's why I like this week, because the Seahawks last week against Atlanta really burned them on the outside with Lockett and Metcalf. They did get him in and out of the slot a little bit, but it was really on the outside routes that they were able to burn Atlanta, and that's why I've got him as the start this week over CeeDee Lamb, even though Lamb's ceiling could end up being tremendously high, especially if this turns into a huge sit out. I think he's going to be sitting right there on that barrier. And if he doesn't end up being a start, and he is, or if he does end up being a start and Gallup ends up being a sit, I could see them going back and forth as well. But for me this week, it's Cooper and Gallup, and we'll continue to keep an eye on CeeDee Lamb because he's going to be fantasy viable very shortly. The New York Giants and the Chicago Bears will be a lot of fun to watch if you're a Giants and Bears fan. For the rest of us, we'll probably be ignoring it. No, I'm kidding. Don't get mad at me, Bears and Giants fans. I'm just joking with you. Just messing around. I'm still bitter about that loss last week. That's why. But anyway, heading into who we're going to start and sit for the New York Giants, we're going to sit Darius Slayton this week. Okay. And the reason we're going to sit him this week is because last week, Marvin Jones on the outside, the big play guy, the deep guy for the Detroit Lions, was shut down by the Chicago Bears. So the same thing could end up happening to Darius Slayton this week. That's why I'm going to roll with Sterling Shepard as well. Why am I going to roll with Sterling Shepard? Well, that's a great question. Because Chicago gave up quite a bit of points to Danny Amendola, who I just talked about a minute ago, right? Saw a decent amount of targets, had over 80 yards. So Sterling Shepard is a guy that I could see them working into the slot a little bit more, especially if Golden Tate can't get back on the field this week. So I'll go with Shepard as the start, Slayton as the sit this week. Also, I would not be surprised if they really try their hardest to get Barkley going. After that horrible week one, I would not be surprised if they really tried to feed him the ball and get him going in week 2. On the flip side, for Allen Robinson, I'm not going to let all the talk affect me right now, okay? I'm not looking to trade him or anything like that. Continue to hold him. With Allen Robinson, I think one of the things is he just saw a bunch of running backs get paid. He feels like he should be paid a little bit more since the contract he signed was coming off an ACL, and he probably should have gotten a little bit more, but he didn't, and now he wants that. So for Allen Robinson, I'm going to roll with him this week against the New York Giants. And Anthony Miller, I will roll with him again this week as well. I'll start them both. Last week, the Giants gave up over 50 fantasy points to wide receivers, the 4th most in the league in week 1. So both of these guys could eat. And even though Trubisky started off looking like normal Mitchell Trubisky, he ended up finishing the week looking like Mitch Magic Trubisky. Yeah, I know that's a bad joke. But anyway, he looked a lot better towards the end of the game. We'll see which Mitchell Trubisky comes out this week, but whoever it is, I'm still going to roll with Robinson and Miller. Washington and Arizona both starting off the season 1-0, and who would have thought that about Washington? But Ron Riverboat Rivera's got that team playing well right now. But we'll see what happens this week against an Arizona defense that is playing a lot better. Now, here's an interesting fact for you. Arizona only allowed 8 fantasy points to opposing wide receivers last week. Now, San Francisco is decimated with injuries, but they still can play. They shut that blank down with San Francisco last week. They looked really good. Even with that being said, back to Terry McLaurin, back to Steven Sims. I'm going to roll with both of them this week. Inman will continue to be a sit for me. But Sims and McLaurin are going to be starts for me this week because, quite honestly, they're going to have to throw to keep up with Arizona, right? That's going to end up happening. This Arizona offense, we saw it last week, explosive. DeAndre Hopkins looking like the DeAndre Hopkins from Houston. Didn't skip a beat whatsoever. Was Kyler Murray's favorite target. With that, we need to take a look at how big of a gap we're going to see at any point in time in this game. If Arizona gets up big, obviously Washington's going to have to throw it because that run game is inefficient at best, okay? Antonio Gibson, Peyton Barber, J.D. McKissick, I mean, it doesn't matter, okay? The run game didn't look great last week. I don't expect it to be anything that they can lean on, and if they're down big, they're going to have to throw it quite a bit. Dwayne Haskins looked like he took a step forward coming into this season, looked good last week. I think we're going to see them hit McLaurin and Sims quite often in week 2. Hopkins, he's going to be a start for me. 16 targets last week. Who would have thought when you had the weapons around Kyler Murray that he does, that he still would have almost given him 20 freaking targets last week? Man, Hopkins looks good. It was just a little bit lower on him than most people, but I was not fading him by any means, and he's showing out. For Fitz and Kirk, though, last week they combined for 10 targets and 5 catches. So these two just might end up playing a supporter role all season long. Yeah, you might find one of them has a decent game here and there, but it's going to be the DeAndre Hopkins show moving forward. So for me, we're going to start Hopkins every single week. For the other two guys, unless it's a really, really good matchup, I just don't think we're going to see these two guys put up a whole lot of volume this week. I think it's going to be Hopkins as usual, and I think they're going to be running the ball quite a bit as well. KC will head to the Los Angeles Chargers this week. Tyrod Taylor and the Chargers looking to get things going with that offense that disappointed quite a bit of people last week. For KC, I'm gonna go out on the plank and I'm going to start Sammy Watkins this week. I might end up falling out into the sea and never being heard from again, but I'm still gonna start Watkins this week. And of course, you start Hill as well. 9 targets for Watkins last week led the team. Now, one reason I was kind of off Watkins is number one, big week 1 last week, disappeared the rest of the season, right? However, couple of concerns. Number one, Mecole Hardman, didn't really see anything from him last week, right? He's going to be a sit for me this week. And Demarcus Robinson, early in that game, they were really going towards him. Patrick Mahomes was targeting him often. He dropped 2 touchdowns. Now, Patrick Mahomes is the type of quarterback that if you drop a ball, it doesn't matter to him. He's coming back to you because he trusts you. That's why you guys are teammates. Okay, that's the type of leader Patrick Mahomes is. Nothing against guys that aren't like that. That's just who he is as a person. But, you drop too many touchdowns and Sammy Watkins is there and Tyreek Hill is there. There's always enough options in this offense. There's always enough targets in this offense to have 2 wide receivers. So Sammy Watkins and Tyreek Hill will both be starts against the Chargers this week. And I am going to go ahead and start both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. And why is that? Because you're facing Kansas City, and Kansas City puts it on you. You got to throw it. And if you got to throw it, you're going to put up quite a bit. So last week, we really saw LA work that run game, right? Joshua Kelly got the ball quite a bit. Austin Eckler got the ball quite a bit on the ground. But Austin Eckler wasn't really involved in the passing game. Do they take a step back and put him into the passing game a little bit more? Really, this week, it's going to be all hands on deck because his offense is really going to have to move to keep up with KC. And if they stand a chance, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are both going to have to be starts this week. The Houston defense didn't look that bad against Kansas City to start. J.J. Watt looks like he's healthy and ready to go. They got a couple of sacks early on. But as the game went, this defense, even though it was bending, it finally ended up breaking. Is it going to break this week? Or will Baltimore just put it away from the very beginning and just trash it? Well, Baltimore looking good coming off a week 1 victory. And against Houston, the Houston defense almost gave up a couple of big plays to Robinson, and they got bailed out by him dropping the ball. But Tyreek Hill was really non-existent until that touchdown catch. It was Sammy Watkins. So is it in this offense that, the wide receiver or this defense, are they going to be able to shut down the wide receiver 1 and it's going to be, hey, the wide receiver 2 needs to beat me? That's kind of what it was last week. That's what it was with KC. Tyreek Hill, they were like, we don't really want you to beat us. Sammy Watkins ended up beating them. Obviously, Tyreek Hill got that touchdown there later in the game, but Marquise Brown is still going to be a start for me. And I would imagine somebody else could end up being good this week as well. But who's it going to be? If Marquise Brown gets shut down, somebody else is going to have to step up. But is it Miles Boykin? Is it Duvernay? Is it Snead? I don't know. And I don't care to put whoever it may be in my lineup. That's too much of a risk for you this week. Start Marquise Brown if you have him. The ceiling might be a little bit lower than what it was last week, but we're still going to roll with him. Now, if he gets shut out and somebody else has a big week, just keep in mind, I told you that might happen. I just don't know who it's going to be. It's kind of hard to read these weapons right now. Outside of the big guys with Andrews, obviously Jackson, even the backfield is tough to read right now with the Baltimore Ravens. So for the wide receivers, it would make sense that would be just as difficult. For Houston, though, I'm going to start Fuller and Cobb this week, just like I did last week. I still think Cobb is a guy that Deshaun Watson is going to end up working very well with. Just week one, just didn't work out that way in week one. And we saw from Fuller, the dude commanded a lot of targets last week. He's the true wide receiver one. And as I said last week, right? If you own a sports car and you live like in a northern state or on the East Coast where it snows a lot, when you have those nice days, when you have that opportunity to take out the car, you do it, right? And that's the same thing with Will Fuller, okay? You drafted this sports car. You're going to use this sports car while he's healthy. Get him in your lineup. Continue to roll with him. But Cobb and Fuller are the only two that I'll be starting from Houston this week. New England's going to head out west to face Seattle this week. And man, they're going to have to throw the ball more than 19 times with Cam Newton if they have any chance at winning. Now, it might end up happening. But for me personally, I'll roll with Edelman, but I don't care about Harry or Myers right now, okay? With N'Keal Harry, yeah, commanded a pretty decent target share last week, but again, they only threw the ball 19 times, so is that really that much of a target share? He got a few targets, but it's not anything to write home about. It was less than double digits. So just be careful with that trap. I've seen a lot of people mention Harry's target share in week one. It's a little misleading though, because they only threw the ball 19 times. I got to see this offense throw the ball more often before I trust anybody other than Julian Edelman. For Seattle, Lockett and Metcalf had huge weeks last week. They combined for 16 targets, 12 of those receptions, 187 yards, 35 pass attempts from Russell Wilson last week. That's what a lot of people have been waiting on, right? For this offense to blow the doors off of. Somebody made a comment that I said I blow the doors off of too many times in the waiver wire video. So I just had to make a little bit of a joke there. For you that caught it, congratulations. Someone said you should play a drinking game out of it. Well, you've only had to drink once this episode. But I could see them passing early and then running the ball more in the second half, especially if they get well out in front of New England. Go out there and really pass the ball quite a bit. That's why Metcalf and Lockett are both going to be starts for me this week. David Moore, I've got him in there. He's going to be a sit because there isn't going to be a wide receiver 3 on this team that's really going to ever do much of anything. Maybe a big game somewhere along the line, but not nearly enough to start every single week. So a lot of passing early in the game, and then maybe in the second half is when they really take a look at the backfield and say, let's get these guys going and get the run game taking a step forward as well. Monday Night Football is going to be in Las Vegas with the opening of the Raiders' new stadium, and New Orleans is going to head out there to help them celebrate that opening. Now, we find out, it was just before I recorded this video, that Michael Thomas is now going to be missing several weeks. So this week, I'm going to be firing up Emmanuel Sanders and Tre'Quan Smith. Now, that might surprise you, but Tre'Quan Smith is going to be decently high in my rankings this week. And I'm not looking for like a wide receiver 1 week, but keep in mind, Robbie Anderson burned this same Las Vegas team last week. Tre'Quan Smith is basically like Robbie Sanders 2.0 without all the off-field issues that he's had, okay? They're really the same type of player. These are deep threats, guys that can go down the field for big plays. I could expect that to happen this week. Tre'Quan Smith could take the top off at any point in time of Las Vegas and score a touchdown. So I am rolling with Tre'Quan Smith as a start this week and Emmanuel Sanders as a start this week. He had that touchdown last week. I expect New Orleans to throw the ball a little bit because Las Vegas is going to come out gunning, right? They want to get that dub in their new home stadium. They're going to be coming out ready to roll. Deontay Harris, who's kind of the wide receiver 3-4, wide receiver 3 now that Michael Thomas is going to be out, he's going to be a sit for me. With Henry Ruggs, I've got him listed as a sit right now because I don't know what's going on with the injury, okay? He was banged up a little bit last week. Is he going to be ready to roll this week? I don't know that yet, so I've got him listed as a sit right now. But I've got Aguilar, Renfro, and Edwards also listed as a sit. Now, Edwards led the Raiders last week in snaps for wide receivers, okay? he's going to be a big time wide receiver. Okay, it didn't happen last week. It's going to happen soon. But somebody's going to have to step up for Las Vegas this week. Who's it going to be? That's the question. But that's why I got him listed all as sits. Aguilar had that, one touchdown last week. He might only have 1 or 2 catches a game, but one might be a 50-yard catch for a touchdown. He might have a 25-yard catch for a touchdown, something like that. He might have 3 catches for 75 yards because one of them was a 55-yard catch. That, to me, is not a guy I want in my lineup on a regular basis. Bryan Edwards, we haven't really seen it yet. Now, I will say this. If we know Henry Ruggs is going to be out, if we know he's going to miss this week, I'm going to pivot and say Edwards will be a start for me. But as of right now, here on Wednesday, because there's still a lot of things up in the air, I've got all 4 of these guys listed as sits. Waller will end up being a start for me. Josh Jacobs last week had a huge game and actually saw a lot more work in the passing game, which a lot of people doubted, but we told you, Headliner Nation, he was going to take a step forward. They're going to use him quite a bit as well. And don't be surprised if they just try to stuff the ball down New Orleans' throat all day, because that's how they're going to control the game. Josh Jacobs could have the big week this week. Somebody from this Las Vegas team is going to have a good day, but who will it be? We'll have to wait a little bit to find out. So stick with me throughout the week. We'll talk about it more in my rankings video. All right, Headliner Nation, there you have it. My start and sits at the wide receiver position for the week. Don't forget, do me a favor. You're new here to the Fantasy Headliners? Well, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stick around. Become a part of Headliner Nation today. Make sure you also hit the like button on this video if you appreciate the content. And as always, if you've got questions about a wide receiver, leave them in the comments below. We'll try to get to as many as possible, but if we can't, always keep in mind, if you use the link down below for Patreon, we've got a $10 tier per month that lets you get all of your fantasy questions answered, guaranteed responses from either Jake or myself. So Headliner Nation, do me a favor, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.